In this final episode of The Fly Fisherman, Sarah watches an expert as he creates one of the many types of flies used in fly fishing. Using oils, Roger puts the finishing touches on his painting of the mountain stream.
Welcome back to the Davidson River in Pisgah Forest, North Carolina. Roger's going to finish his painting today. It was a 30 by 40 inch painting he started in part one. And a little later on, we'll have a chance to talk with Jeb Hall, who is an expert in tying the flies used in fly fishing, which improves the chances of catching the elusive fish.
I'm going to quickly recap what we did on part one of this painting. And to begin, I toned the canvas with a warm, neutral color. Then I used a brush to lay out the composition I thought would work. The next step was to block in the large shapes, starting with my darks. I used no white during this block-in process to keep my darks from getting milky. This blocking in continued throughout the painting until all areas were covered. And at this point, I had some sense of where the painting needed to continue with the lighter tones. After I got my values and tones in place, I began to block in the fly fisherman. Okay, so now we've got our darks established, we've got our middle tones established, and we've got our lights established. Now what I need to do is start refining this. I think I can say at this point that the basic foundation of the painting is complete. Okay, we've got some lighter green colors right here reflecting in the water. This is some reflection of this tree from right here. So dark to light. So I start putting in those lighter values. It's really important to use some good brushes because these brushes really do take a beating because I'm using them on their side, I'm pushing them, I'm pulling them. A few more strokes under here. And in this area, I start to see some of the rocks in this shallow water. So I'm going to pick up my darks again and just add a few suggestions of those rocks that are underneath the surface. And over on the left side, remember what I said about always adjusting things? So on this side, this needs to be much darker. So I'll continue to darken this area. And I try not to be timid about what I'm doing here either. I really try and get it down and not be too finicky about it, especially at the first part of the painting. As it goes on, then you can get more and more detail and so on. But right now, it's still working with the big areas or semi-big areas, starting to refine these large shapes into, I call them secondary shapes. And I think the next step for me will be to take a piece of chalk and define this fly fisherman here. Then we'll work on him, the rocks, and some more of the detail. And I'm changing the pose slightly from my original photograph. I'm going to have his head tipped down slightly, just so it will sort of be an unrecognizable personality there. So it will be sort of a generic fisherman. Okay, let's get some green here for the vest. It's almost the color of the background there. I really don't have to put much on there, which means I'll have to change the color of the background to even have that show up. I'm using a large brush on this. I don't need a small brush, at least to begin with, just to block in these areas. Now we have his white hat. Now we have a few highlights right on the edge of his pants. Okay, just a few more touches here. Little strap on his bag. Well, to make the fisherman stand out, let's go around him with some darker colors, some contrasting values. Now, some of these edges, I think I want to lose them. So I want to sort of lose maybe some edges because I don't want to give the fisherman a cutout look. So maybe right in here, we'll go right up to the edge of those pants there, and we'll kind of lose that edge. And I'll just keep cutting around this fisherman. Now right up here, that's an important area. So I want that very dark. I'll take some dark green. And I'll cut right around that fisherman's hat. And that will, and since it's dark against light, that will really make that stand out. So we'll just have some dark foliage back in that area. That way part of him will stand out and part of him will disappear. So he'll become more a part of the painting. And a little highlight right on the edge of the boot. Well, I think that should finish the fisherman, at least for now. I'm going to continue with these darks around the fisherman. So I'll take some ultramarine blue and some Indian yellow. Gives me a nice dark green. And I'll just work more of these areas around this tree. And I want to continue to do this. I want to get some of the areas darker, but I want to lighten this as I go along. It's a pretty dark painting right now. And it was important for me to get these darks in first before I put the lights on top of it. Okay, lighter green. Still got some paint here. This is mixed up from the other day. And with the edge of my brush here, I can just start putting in these lighter passages right over these darker ones. Just with a light touch of my brush. Often in these corner areas, things can be neglected slightly and it will be okay. The eye really does not focus and go to these corners very much. The eye will stay right around in here. It'll come down to that stream, kind of follow around like that. So these areas are not as important, and they do not need, in my opinion, nearly as much detail as areas right in here. This rock can use some attention where the fisherman is standing. So I want to give that a nice warm color. And just like the highlights on his arm and so on, we'll put some highlights on this rock. So since this rock is flat on the ground, it's going to be catching more sunlight than anything up on its side. Now the sun comes in and with all these trees around, the sunlight is going to hit this rock with a lot of dappled light. So I'm just going to make some patterns in here of the light as it's bouncing across this rock. And right now I'll just sort of outline those rocks because remember the light is coming at me here. I'm looking into the sunlight. So I'll have a lot of nice rim lighting on the edge of these rocks back here. And that's what's also giving me all this light on this water back here. It's because I'm looking into the sun. And there's some light coming through the trees, hitting this bank here that's got lots of rocks and earth showing. Mix up a dark color with ultramarine blue and some brown, burnt umber. Let's make some rocks out here in the middle of this mountain stream. So they would be very dark because we're looking at the shadow side of these rocks. And I'll just place a few of these in here arbitrarily. Of course, this is what's creating all these rapids here. And it's a little sparse of anything going on in this area. So this will add some interest by putting some rocks here. And of course these rocks get smaller as they go back. And to echo some of these rocks on this side, we'll put some on the left here. This is a calm part of the river here, so we won't have too much in the way of water running around these rocks right here, but we may add some nice reflections later. Well, this paint is pretty wet, so I need to let it dry, and we'll come back to it a little later.
This is Jeb Hall, and he's a fly fisherman, an instructor and a guide. He was raised in the mountains of North Carolina and has foraged and explored hundreds and hundreds of streams and rivers. And I'm wondering if you can explain to me the art of fly fishing. How do you attract the fish and how do you catch it?
Well, Sarah, the idea of fly fishing is to present the fish something that they commonly eat. And most of our fish are insectivorous, meaning most of their food source comes from insects, whether it be aquatic insects or terrestrial insects like beetles or grasshoppers or inchworms.
You're trying to make something that looks real or maybe even more delicious than real?
Maybe more delicious than real, something that stands out from the rest of the insects that are already coming down the river.
So first you have to get their attention.
That's right.
And you're saying, hey,
hey, come check me out.
This or this. And now what types of materials do you use?
We use a variety of natural and synthetic materials. So natural materials, we have hair from elk, feathers from pheasants. We have the skin of a squirrel here that's been cut into little strips. Poor little critter. And then we have synthetic materials that provide flash and attraction. Wire, of course, provides weight and shows segmentation when you wrap it around the hook. And then thread is what holds it all together.
And so you've got a little setup here for making a fly?
That's correct. This is called a fly tying vise. And then we have our thread on a bobbin.
Okay, so what's the first step?
First step is just to tie a thread on a hook, and we just wrap the thread on like that. And so you put down a thread base, and that just makes everything secure. And then we're going to put on some wire, and this is going to kind of hold everything together and give the fly that segmented look.
Oh, so the body is the wiry part.
It'll be wire wrapped over this shiny material right here, this floss. So the wire will give it, you know how insects have a segmented body?
Yes.
It's going to give it that segmented look. Now, whether or not the fish think that that's what it is, we don't know. But it makes us feel better about our fly, which makes us more confident. And the more confident you are, the better you fish. And the better you fish, the more fish you catch, or at least the more fun you're going to have.
So you've just pulled out a little bit of fluff.
Yeah, this is called dubbing, and it's just a loose material that you spin onto the hook with your fingers. And it sort of binds itself into the thread, and what it does is it provides a little bit of flash. But this is going to put the thorax of the fly on. So we have the abdomen, then we have the thorax.
Oh, and I see the sparkle in there. Just a little glint.
Just a little glint, and it's UV reflective too, so fish can see UV, which we can't. And so it's a little extra attraction in there.
I wonder who figured that out.
Fishermen have a lot of time on their hands, and they're a little obsessed with catching fish. So.
Now, fishing with a worm on a hook, that is a submerged, below the water surface
Correct.
kind of bait. And this is really totally different.
Well, a lot of people associate fly fishing with the dry fly fishing, which is the most romantic side of fly fishing. But actually, since fish do about 90% of their feeding subsurface, most of the flies we fish are actually subsurface fly. The idea is, so the fish are always facing upstream, feeding into the current, or at least most of the time that's what they're doing. So they wait for the food to come to them. So you're casting up current and trying to get your fly to drift naturally down to the fish and hope that as it comes by the fish that it grabs your fly instead of grabbing the real fly.
Oh, because yours is flashier and says, eat here.
Eat here, that's right.
Feathers at this point,
This
or is
is a
that
feather.
the elk?
This is a feather. This is a partridge feather, a Hungarian partridge. And this is going to represent legs on the fly. So this would be represents a caddis pupa. And this is a caddis flies are a very common aquatic insect.
And how do you finish that off? How does the winding part stay where it's supposed to be?
Well, we're going to tie a special knot with a little tool called a whip finish tool, and the knot's called a whip finish. And we're almost at that stage. We're going to put a little more of that black flashy stuff on here, and then we're going to be pretty finished with the fly. So now we do the whip finish.
Oh. That's the knot. You're tying the knot right now.
Yeah, with this little tool.
Oh.
Like that. And then typically we put a little bit of glue on there and we're finished.
Just a tiny dot, almost like making a beaded necklace where you put a dot on there to secure it.
Just a dot on there just to kind of hold everything together. And there you are, Sarah.
Ooh, thank you.
Fly for you.
Oh gosh, it's pretty. So this is just one of many types of flies that you could make. You have a whole array of different colors and different sizes.
And we have hundreds of fly patterns that we sell. They come in different sizes, different colors. There can be 100 fly patterns that represent one type of insect. And it's just everyone's individual take on how they feel the insect looks to the fish.
And then if you went saltwater fishing, you'd probably have a bigger fly of some kind, or a...
Oh yeah, we have, large flies. They even have flies for marlin and sailfish that are a foot long or bigger.
Look at this tiny fly. I was astonished to see how many sizes, colors, and types of flies are available. You can choose the proper fly by looking at precisely which insects are hatching that day, therefore increasing your chances of attracting a fish. If I took up the sport, I would simply enjoy the opportunity to stand in the water, listening, watching, and connecting with the great outdoors.
This has had a chance to dry now. And with some ultramarine blue, maybe a touch of black, I'll add this cool color right in this water. This is kind of a area where the water isn't moving too fast, but it is moving some. We'll bring that right in by his legs and past his pant leg there. Now I don't see too much blue in my photograph. I do see some, but I'm really adding some of this blue just to add a little bit of life and a little bit more color to this painting than I see in the photograph. And of course the photograph just definitely doesn't pick up all the color that I would see if I were on location, all the color I would see with my own eyes. So all these little ripples of water here are pretty parallel to the horizon, but as they come forward, they can change the perspective some. So as they come down this way, I can add some of these ripples and to go at a little bit different angle. Now I couldn't do that back here. It would look wrong. The perspective would be wrong. But as I come forward, I can sort of force the perspective, add some perspective that comes back. Let me bounce back up here to these trees. I haven't done anything to this area yet, so let me fill some of that in. Looks a little misty back here. This gets quite light back in here. Just sort of fades away. I probably use the side of my brush more than I use the front of it like that. Now I think we'll get into the finer details of this painting. I'm going to put some highlights, some backlighting right on the tops of those rocks. And add a touch of color to those rocks right here. And right where that rock hits the water, I'm going to define the edge of it. And that just kind of defines the area where the rock goes into the water. All right, now let's move up to this area of the painting and put in some tree trunks, limbs and branches. Make a dark color with my burnt umber and ultramarine blue. Maybe add a touch of burnt sienna, because I want to see some tree trunks back here. This will just give this area some form rather than just texture. Now I don't want the tree trunk to go all the way up like it's a dead tree, because all these tree trunks here have a lot of foliage around them. So I'll see the tree trunk and then it will disappear behind some of this green foliage. Then it will appear again. So we'll see it and then we'll lose it. This gives a lot of nice verticals to the painting because we got so many horizontals going here. This sort of breaks up all those horizontals in the piece. Now I want to make these different sizes, and I also want to space them differently. I don't want them all the same space in between these. So some will be close together, some further apart. And we'll move over here and we'll do the same thing. These tree trunks often lean towards the light and so on. So the tree trunks here may be facing inward slightly. And that will help to bring the eye in as well. And with a very light touch, I'll make some much lighter, just barely visible. And even back here, let's put just a few, just with a very, very light touch, so they barely show up. Now I'll add some branches to these trunks. Again, I'll just make them disappear here and there between the leaves. And my brush is just being held very loosely, so the brush is sort of doing the work all by itself. I don't have a firm grip on this brush. Just kind of letting it fall where it wants to. Now comes one of the fun parts of the painting, and that is putting in some negative areas. So I'm going to put in some sky, and even though I don't see much sky coming through on my photograph, I'm going to put some negative areas in here between these tree trunks. And that will just give it another layer and another point of interest in this painting. So I want most of these negative areas kind of up high. The sky won't be down in this area, but I could see some sky popping through up in these upper regions of the painting. And I want to have these quite soft and a bit round. I don't want real sharp edges on these negative areas because this sunlight is coming through these trees, and as it comes through these trees, that light sort of disperses and gives that nice soft look. Okay, over here, let's add more negative areas. By putting this sky up here, this will just define another area of trees in the distance. And I want this very soft. I don't want any hard edges there because that would bring it too much into the foreground. There's a lot of soft edges here. A few more negative areas on the right side to give it some balance. With some yellow ochre, a touch of white. I want a few highlights on the edge of these trees, similar to what we have down here on these rocks, that rim lighting. So we'll put that same kind of rim lighting on the edge of a few of these trees. And that rim lighting will only show up now and again because there's so much shadow going on in here. But a few touches of rim lighting will define these tree trunks. Well, that may be enough for the tree trunks. To finish this, I think what we need to do now is work on this water, where the water is rushing over these rocks. I'm going to make this a warm color because it's glistening in the sun. And with a very light touch, just the edge of my brush will add these bright highlights. Right back here, this is a beautiful area right here. I want the sun to be really hitting this area back here real hard. Now I kind of have this S-curve going here, so I want to pull that top of that S-curve around and back into these trees. And so now we can see just a little bit of that water going between those tree trunks back there. Earlier we put some of these rocks here in the middle of the mountain stream. So I'm going to put some rim lighting on each one of those. That will define those rocks, bring them out. And where the water is hitting the base of these rocks as it moves downstream, we'll put in some more of these little ripples of water. Now this painting is pretty dark, and that was done intentionally, mainly so this water would show up, because what makes things show up like this nicely is the contrast between the light and the dark. To finish this painting, I need to put in the fishing pole. So I'll mix some tan color with some yellow ochre and white. Before I do that, I'm going to take a piece of chalk, because I want to get this just the right angle. And if I didn't get that right with a chalk, I can just wipe it out and try again. But once I put it down with a brush, it would be much more difficult to change. The paint I have on my brush is rather thin, and it's thin because I want it to flow off the edge of the brush easily. Take that and really without hesitation, just drag it up. Now I missed that mark just by a little bit. That's okay. I'm also going to put some fishing line on here. So again, with a very light touch, I'll just take this and quickly drag it down. Well, that fishing line finishes this piece, so I hope you've enjoyed watching the painting process here of the Fly Fisherman.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.